Baroness Howe.
I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
Minister.
My Lords, we are indeed aware of the Irish Government's plans to introduce new standards for domestic solid fuels under their forthcoming clean air strategy. Of course, the implementation of this policy is for the Irish Government. It's our understanding that they plan to introduce it in 2022. We are hoping to have technical discussions with the Irish Government later this week in order to establish some further detail of how and when they plan to bring these measures into force.
Baroness Howe.
Minister for the Environment in the Republic of Ireland actually said inspections of cross-border fuel movements will be required. Does the Noble Lord the Minister not think that that shows huge hypocrisy from the Irish Government, where the border sometimes matters when it affects them, but as far as anything to do with the protocol, there couldn't possibly be any kind of border at the frontier? The Noble Minister has been very patient with the European Union. Is he beginning to feel that time is running out and it's time to simply say this is not working, it has to go?
So my Lords, the Noble Baroness makes a very good point. The UK and the Republic of Ireland are obviously different countries divided by an international border, and most areas of national life change when you cross that border. For example, legal systems, currency, taxation, many others. Some of those arrangements relate specifically to the movement of goods, VAT, excise, for example, and these differences are nevertheless managed in market without the need for a physical infrastructure at the border. And so I wait for the discussions with the Irish Government, and I don't want to prejudge them, but obviously I don't see why we would have any difficulties if the Irish Government wished to manage one further regulatory difference between our two countries in a sensible and pragmatic way as goods go onto the Irish market.
Lord Hay.
My Lords, can I just say that both the question and the answer have been misleading. 100,000 tonnes of smoky coal goes from north to south on the island each year, and the stricter regulations being applied in Ireland come under EU directives for cleaner air that have been retained and so also apply across the UK today. In Northern Ireland, the Department for Agriculture and Rural Affairs under the DUP's Edwin Poots said last year there will soon be no smoky coal in Northern Ireland. Any future inspection on premises in the Republic of Ireland, not on some border that doesn't exist, to prevent illegal sale of such dangerous solid fuel, especially from third countries, is nothing to do with Brexit or borders or customs. It is everything to do with the far more urgent and important challenge of tackling climate change and protecting public health.
Very good.
So the Noble Lord makes a very fair point, of course, about the objectives of this legislation, and that's why we need to establish the detail of what the Irish Government intend to do and how they intend to go about it. I do think what he says rather proves the point, though, that we've always made, which is perfectly capable for two separate jurisdictions to pursue complementary policy ends which don't involve accepting exactly the same legislation in exactly the same way, and that's the approach we have tried to take.
Lord Dodds.
Coming back to what the Irish Government actually said about this matter, not the interpretation that's just been put on it, are we not in an ironic situation where the Irish Government and others said that any checks on the island of Ireland equal to hard border, any checks, and a hard border would lead to violence? Now we have the Irish Government proposing such a thing. That's the reality of it. And people can shake their heads all they like. But the fact of the matter is the Irish Government, when Varadkar came into power, changed what Enda Kenny was doing and said that no checks, even away from the border, even digitally, would be acceptable. So will the Noble Lord the Minister go back and indicate to his good friend Simon Coveney, whom he's meeting later today and talking to, that no checks means no checks if what they believe is true?
So, my Lords, there has indeed always been some sort of complexity in interpretations of this matter, and it's certainly true that, for example, in areas such as red diesel, where there's a need to avoid fraud due to different excise rates between Northern Ireland and Ireland. There is very good cooperation between HMRC, the Irish Revenue Commissioners, lots of multi-agency and cross-border cooperation, intelligence and information sharing and so on, and that works perfectly well. Now, I don't necessarily say that is a model you can generalise to absolutely everything, but it certainly shows this issue is not quite as black and white as it's sometimes painted.
Lord Howard.
Could the noble Lord the Minister say if the discussion and fuss over fuel is merely an example of Mr Castex's call for aggressive action against the United Kingdom?
So my lords, my noble friend makes a very good point, and we have been concerned again about the threats that have been made against us in the last few weeks, which I think aren't really consistent with a reasonable negotiation. I'm very glad to see that the French government have, for the moment anyway, withdrawn those threats, and I hope they'll do so permanently, because they don't make it any easier to conduct a good process and put relations onto a better footing.
Lord Purvis.
My Lords, can I thank the Minister for his measured responses to earlier questions on this subject, because it is very sensitive. I have the answer in the Doyle in front of me. There is no reference to border checks. There is reference to Irish local authorities having increased powers to check on solid fuels if they are imported from Northern Ireland, which they have had already. And indeed, the North-South Joint Agency Task Force has been operating since 2015 in this regard. Can the Minister please reassure the House that this will not be used to inflame some of the tensions that already exist, and the North-South Joint Agency Task Force on fuels will be operating normally to ensure that there is proper consensus on this?
My Lords, well, indeed, of course, we do not wish to inflame tensions in any way, and I don't think we go about this in a way that would do that. I think the point that I've been trying to make, and I think others have, and other noble lords have too, is that not that we are saying that this proposal from the Irish government would require checks at the border. I think they're not saying that, we're not saying that, nobody wants that. Is that it's possible to manage differences without such checks in certain circumstances, and this is a concrete case of that, perhaps, and there are some others.
Lord Moyland.
My Lords, far from adding to tensions, isn't this actually a rather hopeful sign? As the noble Lord Purvis of Tweed has said, what is envisaged is that local authority officers will be checking for goods coming into the Republic of Ireland from Northern Ireland that shouldn't be coming in. Now, isn't this a pattern that could be applied to great benefit and to great effect? It might even be called mutual enforcement. Isn't this a pattern that could be applied as a substitute for the ridiculous and unworkable attempts to operate the protocol as it currently works? Very hopeful.
My Lords, my noble friend makes a very good point, as always. It is a concrete case that demonstrates that it is possible to manage these matters in other ways. It is one of the reasons why, of course, what we put forward in the command paper is a compromise. It is not that. It is that we would, for most purposes, police goods going into Ireland and the single market in the Irish Sea, but that we would wish to see goods flowing freely into Northern Ireland, and that is I think a workable and sensible compromise proposal, and we haven't yet heard why it couldn't work in the negotiations.
Baroness Chapman.
My Lords, this situation does rather highlight the need for a certain amount of bandwidth on behalf of the government, in that it needs to negotiate simultaneously with the EU and occasionally with individual member states. So does the Minister think that the undeniable damage to the Prime Minister's authority in recent weeks is leading to a bit of a problem with government bandwidth? And I ask this because it is really easy to talk tough, when he's here at least, about Article 16. But if the noble Lord the Minister and the Prime Minister don't have the backing of the entire Cabinet to see through the consequences, which would be further damage to international relationships and possibly a trade war, Is he confident that any of his Cabinet colleagues would be with him in the trenches if he leads us into further disputes?
Yeah.
So, my Lords, the Cabinet and the Government stands fully behind the policy which we set out in the command paper in July, which is a very good compromise policy and which we still hope to negotiate. We've made clear that a negotiated outcome is the best one, but that policy paper, which we all stand behind, also makes clear that Article 16 is a legitimate and useful tool if necessary, and that remains the Government's position.
My Lords, all supplementary questions have been